Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Open Design Docs podcast. I'm Jason Culbertson, your host, and today we're diving into the unique intersection of design and entrepreneurship. Joining us is Masoud Ardestani, a designer turned founder who's making waves as a CEO of Rapha, a recruiting platform dedicated to humanizing the hiring process. I think many designers like myself have dreams and tinkered with starting their own business. Today, I'm hoping to hear about Masoud's journey from design to being a founder of an actual company and what that journey was like, the good, bad, ugly, everything in between. So welcome, Masoud.
Thank you.
Excited for you to be here. Thanks for
No,
joining
thank
us.
you so much, man. I appreciate being coming on board. I'm excited for being the first guest of this amazing podcast. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right in. I want to back up all the way to the beginning.
Yeah.
So, uh, beginnings of you as a designer. So can you take us back to when, the first thing that really got you interested in design? Was there a
Yeah.
moment or a
Mhm.
particular influence, something that pulled you into even the idea of
Yeah.
becoming a designer?
So I got to take you back a while back. So at San Jose State, I was majoring in psychology. I've always been interested in design, architecture, fashion, just aesthetics. Always been interested. Fun fact, I was actually a very amateur artist, had a few gallery showings, but realized that my friends can't afford art. So I, I had to take that creativity and bring it down to the browser. So I actually, when I was starting my first company, it was a college carpooling app. Nothing to write home about, but I remember
College what app?
it was a college carpooling app
Oh,
called Ride.
art.
Yeah, so I had it going for a couple of years, but I was actually going to be focusing on the business side of things. But I quickly realized, and I was like, you know what? I know what it's supposed to look like because I had it in my sketchbook. And so I went on YouTube and I typed in how to design a home screen. I remember. And the first thing I designed was Airbnb's login screen. The first thing I designed was
Okay.
Airbnb's login screen. And once I learned how to make the rectangles, the shapes, the drop shadows, I was like, oh yeah, it's over. And it just
What software
quickly,
were you using back then? What were you using to design
oh,
it?
Photoshop. Oh,
We were all there. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. I was like, I just need to learn the keyboard shortcuts on how to make the shapes. Cause I already knew the layout. I always had this aesthetic about myself. I knew what I wanted to make. I just need the tool sets. And so once I realized it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm designing it. So I absorbed the design function pretty easily and I just ran with it after that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, like building off of that, how did you then pursue becoming a professional designer?
Yeah.
And what was sort of the path you took?
Mm-hmm.
You said you were at San Jose State at the time.
So, yeah, I was at San Jose
Did
State.
you then start pursuing design while in college, or tell me about that journey, like your
Yeah.
early days?
So once I realized how to make these shapes, um, I quickly launched this app, and this is kind of like the first thing that I think most designers need to pick up on is just launch it, you know? So it wasn't the most beautiful thing ever, but I really wanted to just get something out there to customers. And so while I was at San Jose State, I was building my first company and launching it in San Jose State for college students to go to Coachella, go to
Mm.
family and things like that. So I launched it in which allowed me to learn different principles of design, like PRs with engineering, speak with engineering, collaboration, talking to customers, research. But one thing I quickly learned about myself is I don't hang around the wireframing as much. I have always gone through high fidelity. And that's one thing just early on I learned about myself is getting something on the phone, whether it's the now Figma prototyping, things like that, allowed me to, hey, would you actually buy this if it's in your hands right now? Would you actually use this?
Mm.
versus, hey, let's just put some bullet points and let's think about it. No, like let's just get something out there. It could be like literally static, no animation. So that allowed me to, while I was at San Jose, um, n- launch the early product of our college carpooling app, and then by me building something and designing something allowed me to take those learnings and you know push them into my next role as a designer, etc., which allowed me to take those early learnings and kind of build on top of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that you sort of feels like you had that entrepreneurial bug right away, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that sounds like the initiative, just be like, all right, I'm not just going to talk about design. I'm going to like build something, launch something, get it into the hands of people. Um, which is awesome because, I think so much of what designers talk about is like getting feedback from users, getting things in the hands of our actual users. Where did you go? So I assume sort of graduated from San
Yeah.
Jose State, and then what was your professional career like?
Yeah.
Walk me through like the beginning of that.
Yeah. So I had that startup going for 4 years. So that was like a big
Good.
chunk of my time, actually. And what's funny is, you know, I had to pay some employees. We grew the team out to like 10 people, raise a little bit of money. And I had to get a sales job, actually, and which will eventually lead to where we're at with Rapha. But I took a sales job at Zenefits, funny enough. Um, and I was making money. And what's funny is I always came to work with two laptops. The laptop to do demos with schools. I was selling the software, which was our college carpooling app, and then my Zenefits sales laptop. So on my lunch break, I was like, "Hey, boss, I'm gonna take my lunch break." I would head across the street into this cafe and talk to USC and UC Berkeley about buying our software. So
Wow.
I've always had this knack about myself. I was like, I got to make it happen. Like there is no plan B. I've always put all in into what I'm building. So after closing down my company, um, I needed some cash. And I started taking these random gigs here and there, freelance and things like that. And what's funny is this kind of is like the origin story of Rafa is I started applying to design jobs, but I wasn't hearing back from them. And I thought to myself, man, if only you can hear how I got to where I am today, I guarantee you'll lend me your ear. So I built a audio resume tool that told my story. And you're able to drag and drop your resume, add a couple of audio clips to certain areas, and it allowed me to get my design job at OKCoin, etc.
What was the name of that product that you built?
Yeah, it was called Cezanne. It's on my LinkedIn. You can check it out. Well, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was interesting because I built it around my own problems. This kind of goes into like
Mm,
designer to founder mode type of thing. You know, there's always an opportunity. We can always design these very nice mock-ups, but like getting it into the customer's hands is where all bets are off. That's where real stuff happens versus competing in the conference room or these meetings. And so I've always had this knack of just building things off of my own problems from the college carpooling app, from finding a job. And so I quickly launched my resume tool, was able to get a job, and went on to, starting at, um, I was a senior designer at this one home sharing startup, became the head of design there. And then after that, went on to becoming a staff designer at OKCoin, which is the crypto exchange and things like that. Then shortly after that, left OKCoin to join Meta, which then I was at Meta. I was like on Messenger's team. I was bouncing around on Instagram and things like that. And then which led me to take the leap over to be building Rafa today. And definitely there are some nuggets in those that timeline, but that's kind of like how it jump started into my
yeah.
career.
So maybe going back a little bit, and I definitely want to get into the things you learned along the way, but going back a little bit to
Hmm.
your time when you had started Cezanne,
Hmm.
how were you running Cezanne while also working at some of these other jobs, or did you have to abandon that or shut that down once you
Yeah.
were working full time?
Yeah. So I was like in an interesting period because I was like, man, I gotta get something, I got immediately. And so, um, when I launched Cezanne though, one thing was very evident is that people had the same problem as me. You know,
Mm,
people aren't able to put their best foot forward. People are struggling on telling their story. And on top of that, um, the hiring process, it's a human to human transaction, but we really bet everything on this piece of paper. And so when I built it, I actually hired someone from Hong Kong to build alongside me. Just found him on Upwork, couldn't care less. I was like, hey, man, this is where we need to go. And by any means necessary in 1 month. And so as I was designing it, I was at the time using tools like Dropbox Paper for the PRD stuff, the road mapping. And that's a little bit about that designer mindset that you need to build out new muscles, which is product management, building out these PRs, these roadmaps, thinking about the point systems of like how many points does it take to
mm,
release these features. Like, is this a 1 pointer? Is this two? Is this a three? Is this a five? Is this an eight? You know, and laying things out so you can mitigate the risk and mitigate the guesswork because I was paying out of pocket for this guy. I didn't really have much. And so, because these guys are by the hour. So, like, by being very clear on the documentation, which is another muscle that needed to be flexing in my professional career, allowed me to mitigate the risk, execute, meet the deadlines, and of course, make those trade offs as you go to meet that end goal, which is releasing and getting to where it was.
yeah, super interesting. Um, while you were at OKCoin and
Mhm.
Meta, do you feel like you were utilizing those skills,
Oh, yeah.
and how so?
I think um, as a designer, I don't just stop at the design. I've always thought about the business because the design impacts the business, the end user, the customer, the merchant, whatever industry you're in, whether it's marketplace, B2B, AI, whatever.
Mm,
Design is, first impression is key. And if your front door is very not great, doesn't look good, it's tough to get in, that's on you. And so I think I never stopped at here's the UI. See you later. Let me know how it goes. No, I'm in there defining what the end goal is actually with my team. And so at OKCoin, I was defining like what the goals are with like product managers. I wasn't just standing by, let me know when you're ready. I get into the weeds of things. And then this kind of brings back to my time when I did the college carpooling app, the resume tools, all the different tools I was working on. Because I never waited around for things to happen. Just went in head first. Hey, what do we need to do? What the ideal outcome is? And let's work backwards. And then how do we actually get there, right? And so the the type of traits I brought into OKCoin was my mentality, drive, and
mm,
ownership mentality. You know, I'm an owner. I'm not an individual contributor, which sure it looks on paper, but I'll own this all the way to the finish line. And so that's kind of like the obsession comes into play of like just really being that having that founder cap on and being able to wear multiple hats pays dividends, when you start something from scratch, right? And so being able to do that in these company settings, pays dividends because, hey,
yeah,
now you got like a bundle of cash to lean on in terms of runway. You're not looking over your shoulder of when the next investor check is coming in, right? Now you're like, oh, wow, I have full autonomy to execute here and try new things and actually, be able to wake up from it, right? So that's kind of like some of the traits I brought along.
I'm curious. I could see, I see those traits as being really powerful at startups. I myself try to look for people when I'm hiring who are very entrepreneurial and bring that drive, understanding of the business, et cetera. But I'm very curious how that fit in at a company the size of Meta.
Yeah. So at Meta, when I was on the Messenger team, for example, those characteristics of ownership, being able to deal with ambiguity, autonomy, because, these companies are massive. There's like, no one's going to tell you where to go type of thing to
Uh,
find answers. There's like wikis for days of documentation. Oh my God. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. What you mentioned wikis and stuff. Um, so like it really,
Wikis to explain wikis.
yeah, wikis to explain wikis, man. I was like, God damn. So I remember my first project I was like taking on. Um, I first thing like I forgot what we were working on, but I noticed I was working with the PM at the time. I was like, all right, let me see the documentation where we're at. Like kind of like on week 2 type of thing. Even though like on these bigger companies, you typically have a generous ramp up period. I was like, dude, let's just get into it. I know, like, that's my mentality of like, I know what the outcome is. Like, let's just see where we're at. And so I quickly realized, I was like, whoa, you're telling me that these 3 bullet points is the PRD? It's like, there's no way we're going to let this fly. Like, type of thing. So that's where I lend myself as that founder, that previous founder, that person that started from zero, that's very used to starting at zero.
Mm.
When there is no clear path, that's where my mentality as a designer tends to thrive in, where your back is against a corner. There is no proven model. You just got to figure it out. But what's cool is that mentality, you're now in the comfort of a bigger company. You have more resources. You have a teammate. You have team members. You have expertise. You have engineers at your disposal. And so that's where it's like, all right, let's actually redefine this. What are the, what's the quality? Are we, what's the end goal? What metric are we pulling on? Like, what's the ideal outcome? And that's where we start brainstorming and just have a clear North Star versus we'll just kind of go with the flow type of thing. Because at these bigger companies, especially with the org I was in, it's very horizontal. So we get affected and we affect other people's roadmaps. So when I joined,
Mm.
I was actually in a lot of different kickoff calls at WhatsApp, at Instagram, Instagram Web, the Blue Team, because Messenger was everywhere, right? And so being very clear, a big chunk of my time is clarification and confirmation of where are we going? Because design is easy once you're in these bigger companies because you got the design systems, you got a design garden
Mm.
from, it's easy. But the difficulty at these bigger companies is like, okay, where to invest next? And what is everyone else working on? Just so we're one, not stepping on each other's toes, not building the same exact thing, not cannibalizing one another, and having clear goals. And a big chunk of my time as a lead there was like reconfirming the documentation, making sure we're all in the know with what everyone's working on, just so we can avoid that
Mm.
that meme of Spider-Man of pointing at each other. Like,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, yeah. So that's kind of like what I try to avoid at these bigger companies because hey, like there's so many designers at Meta, amazing designers at Airbnb, but we have design systems in place. We have a lot of history to work off of. And that is an advantage as a design founder to work in, an ex-design founder of whoever you are, because now you actually have a head start against everyone because you typically had nothing. Now you have everything. And
That's so
yeah,
fascinating because I feel like you walk into, it's interesting to me because, I've worked in a lot of startups. And one of the things with startups is you always coming in, or the first thing you discover is you're like, okay, all these things that I expect to be there are not there. So we have to come and create those things. And I have to use like all my past history to create those, those different processes, et
yeah,
cetera. But it sounds like what you're saying is even at a company, I've never worked at a company the size of Meta, but even a company that size, it was so big that actually you end up in the same spot
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because there's too, it's almost like too much.
It becomes it. You start to become. You're realizing that design is the easy part. That's the fun part.
Like
That's
the work of design itself, right?
the work of design is the easy part. Like shipping out like screens, man, 2 days, 3 days tops. Like, well, that's very straightforward. But the difficulty is which problem is the right problem to solve. That's where a lot of my time was invested in on clarifying the roadmap, where we're going. Let's just lock in a roadmap, never to touch it again. Hey, we'll deal with it as we have to make trade-offs, but let's just be very clear of where we're going versus shipping just to meet our performance reviews, right? Because
You mean
like your goals for your performance is, hey, we were able to ship this, but like
right, right. It's like some sort of like vanity metric that really didn't mean anything.
yeah, because that's kind of like the challenges. Like at a startup, your challenge is you got nothing to work on. You're by yourself. You're in your own category or in a tough spot and you have nothing to work off of. Best of luck. In a bigger company, you have everything at your disposal. You got a buffet line of amazing engineers, PMs, and people. What do you use? So then
Mm,
the similarities between the two is you need to be hyper focused on the avenue you're going on. Investing on the wrong side of the product at a startup level, you might be paying the ultimate price because you don't have the runway. If you're at flip side on the bigger company side, if you invest on the wrong side, there's other ripple effects that affect other teams or other orgs or other pillars. So you just got to be very cognizant of where you're investing your time in.
how in that situation do you even measure success?
At those bigger companies?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think it's easy at a smaller. I mean, like at a startup, it's very measurable. You can see like how's our GMV. You
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
at a bigger company, especially one, you're working on Messenger. Messenger at the end of the day is not driving the GMV of the company. So how
Yeah.
do you measure success in a situation like that? Like, how do you
Yeah.
know if you've picked the right roadmap?
Yeah. So again, in those environments, and like, this take it with a grain of salt. I'm just one guy, in the ocean. But when I was in those rooms, I'm like, what the ideal outcome is, of course, it starts with Mark and like the other heads of other leads. Um, but
Mm.
it really comes down to for like startup success is pretty easy, pretty evident that you can like spot out. It's like, oh, okay, that there's some shimmer of PMF. But like when we released like this messaging feature I was working on for web, uh, hundreds and millions of people were using it, millions of people were using it. But I typically delay looking at those metrics because you kind of have a head start. Any release you do, whether even if it was bad, people are going to touch it.
Yeah.
So we typically wait like at least a week to see if there's usage still.
I
So
mean, you've
like,
got a billion users, right? So
yeah, you
get
typical
millions of
guys,
people
it's kind of like, and that's where some people might get a little greedy and take advantage. I was like, oh, look, everyone's using it. Oh my God, like that's amazing. Billions of people. But like, are they coming back regularly?
Mm.
They constantly using it. Or is there support tickets about it? Because that means if there's issues, that means there are people that care about it that are mentioning it. So like, there's some like things that you typically look at, but yeah, it becomes really tedious on like what success looks like because yeah, you meeting like your top down metrics of like messages sent and like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like then you just, it gets a little chaotic sometimes on that.
Maybe let's pivot for a bit and we can kind of bridge these two worlds together. Because, I'd love to know what really, you were an entrepreneur in the past. You started your own thing. So you always had this bug. You
Mhm.
started working at larger and larger from a very small startup. of your own, to then working at a company, to then working at like OKCoin, which is a little bigger, to then working at Meta, which is massive.
Mm-hmm.
What was the motivation or trigger that made you decide that you wanted to go and like put your hat back into the ring and
Mm-hmm.
like re reignite that like entrepreneurial bug and start your own company and like get off this roadmap that you've
Yeah.
had in terms of like, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people look back at this who may be watching this and they're like, okay, I'm, you have this career path that
Mm-hmm.
people would admire, like going from small to like medium to then very large, working on something that's touching a billion people.
Yeah.
But what made you flip that switch and be like, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to go back to where I began.
You know, I remember Mark had like a interview or like that was doing like a all hand stuff at Menlo Park. And what got me to like um wanting to do my own thing is I wanted to be on that stage actually. You know,
Mm,
I actually want to build something from the ground up and take it all the way because, you know, I don't want to um take my confidence as cocky, but at the end of the day, these products are made of shapes. And I saw it, I see things a little bit differently where, when I look at different things, is like it's a mix of gradients, shapes, fonts, push it together and solve a problem. And I thought to myself, you know what? I see Mark right in front of me. I was like, I think I could one day stand by Mark, Brian Chesky, and all these people. I believe I could build something just as big. And so it's my sheer determination to be like, you know what? I can make something impactful, build on top of it, and make people's lives a lot better than it was before building this. So it's looking around me and seeing the opportunity because I could have, yeah, trust me, those meta salaries, those Fang salaries are cozy. You get really nice and bundled up, get your hot chocolate, be a nice fireplace. It's good. You like it. But I know that this is not it for me. Like, this is not where I just hang up my hat, hang up my jersey. I need to be in the field. And I've always had this like mentality of wanting to go do my own thing again because I'm much wiser now. I know the game. I know how this thing works. And I've seen how the machine is run, bigger companies, the do's, the don'ts. And so I have this ideal thing that I wanted to be working on. So that kind of what led me to leap of like, I was at Menlo Park, saw
mm,
Mark speak. I was like, damn, shouts out to Mark, man. I want to do the same exact thing. And I have so much more to offer. Love Meta as a company, fantastic. I think he did a great job, but I want to start my own thing as well. So that's kind
mm.
of like what kind of like take the leap over.
Can you do a quick, you know, 1 minute sort of explanation of what Rapha does and what Rapha is?
Yeah. Yeah. So Rafa's a recruiting platform that understands context, captures culture fit, grit, resilience, empathy, passion, technical skills without ever conducting a phone screen. We use async audio and AI by and by doing that, we front load the phone screen onto candidates. You see, the problem that we're solving is that qualifying is kind of tough. Companies big and small are going off of surface level materials, LinkedIn's, resumes, GitHub profiles, and take a wild guess. But what you see is not what you get. And so we built a platform where companies are able to ask the burning questions up front, like, why do you want to work at Linktree? Or tell me about the hardest thing you ever done. Company discovers, and for the very first time, can go above and beyond the resumes and the LinkedIn's and speak to their merits, control the narrative, and build that source of truth for hiring teams to take action. And then hiring teams, are able to come together and build consensus around that to do two things. They either redefine the first call, kind of pick up where they left off, or skip it entirely and accelerate the hiring process. So that's in a nutshell of what we do, the problem we're solving, and kind of how it works.
So just to be clear with everybody, I've have known, I think we met actually at OKCoin.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I actually, I was interviewing for a role there,
Yeah.
and you were on the interview panel,
Yeah.
and that role didn't happen. I can't remember all the details,
Hmm.
but you and I then were like,
Yeah.
oh, we really liked each other. Let's keep in
Yeah.
touch,
Yeah. Yeah. I
which is
love the
awesome.
vibes. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been watching your journey. We've kept in touch, and you know, when you talk to me about Rapha, I actually am like a very minor investor in Rapha. I've used Rapha at Linktree. Um, I think the interesting thing about it is the approach of using that screening call, that voice, and it's a very different experience versus having the recruiter having to do that
Yeah.
phone screen themselves. And I actually been able to post a job up, leave like a 2 minute spiel about what that job is so people can hear my voice.
Yeah.
And then I can hear their voice describing, and answering questions that I'm posting.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because it is actually more human and connected versus what, typically the process is, which is like I give the job description or whatever form I have to
Yeah.
fill out to recruiting. They screen people, and then they're like, "Here's our summary," and then I look at it and I look at their portfolio, and I'm like, "Yeah, I like it. I don't like it. Whatever. Let me talk to them. Let me not." It's a pretty like it's meaningful in the sense that it gives me like a closer connection to that person and
Yeah.
helps me screen it versus relying on someone else to do it. Um, I think one of the questions that I myself have,
Hmm.
because I've tried to do various little projects in the past, is what is it really like as a designer? You worked at these companies.
Hmm.
What's it like to then go and have to found your own company
Hmm.
and deal with the non-design things? Like what are the things that you love about it, and what are the things that are, maybe keeping you up at night, or the things that
Hmm.
are like the
Yeah.
biggest challenge?
So I'm still the same exact person from Meta to now. I've always wanted to be in the weeds. That mentality has not gone. I'm actually tripling down in where I'm at. And I think the pros of it is like I'm designing and guiding the North Star, from coming up with the designs, coming up with the roadmaps, creating these sprints, defining these sprints, creating those outcomes that we're looking for, the marketing, the designs, the sales, like everything. Like you do everything as a design founder. And I think my mentality of always wanting to wear more hats on my head and take more ownership is a benefit to where I'm at right now with Rafa, where I'm able to work on so many different things. The things that keep me up at night is United Healthcare coming after my ass, making sure that I pay the healthcare bill for our startup. And so now I think about accounting. I'm like, what the QuickBooks? I don't like. There's things that like I normally wasn't thinking about as a designer and founder. Now that we have like revenue, this and that, you need to think about other things. So
Mm-hmm.
like I was on
Like the back office.
yeah, the back office of stuff. Like I was dealing with payroll now. Now I'm dealing with taxes. Like now I'm dealing with this. Now I'm
Mm.
doing that. It's definitely a headache, but it new muscles are being flexed when I'm kind of pushing these environments of coming back to my earlier point of just focusing on what matters most. I got two kids downstairs. My co-founder has two kids. We're just hyper focused on the right problems to solve because, our time is precious. Times of every founder is precious. So being able to focus on what matters most, the high impact features, the high impact products is where you should be dedicating your energy to. And one muscle that I've been flexing a lot, especially in this AI hype, is not reaching for the shiny object.
Mm.
oftentimes, especially in this AI rush, people are just reaching for AI and dumping it into their product very, very early on. And just because it gets VC's attention, we actually delayed AI for quite some time because we were focusing on the magic. The magic is the candidate's story. And we're just building around this magic early on where we become so good that anytime you think of audio, recruiting, AI, you think of Rapha. And then once you establish the magic, that's where you build the supporting borders around that magic where you protect it. And that becomes your mode, etc., whatever that may be. So to kind of come back to answer your question of what, the pros and cons, you create your own destiny. Love that. But unfortunately, you have to deal with accounting. You got to deal with taxes. You got to deal with healthcare. So that kind of sucks. But you start to build your routine. And the thing that becomes evident is your attention and time becomes, if not the most important currency of your startup, because your time, whether you use it for the good or bad, dictates how long you survive for. So like the right features, reaching out to the right person, speaking with the right ICP, because time you can't get back. And so far that's been the journey and everything so far.
Yeah. I have a whole bunch of questions in my mind right now,
Yeah.
but I think, maybe if you don't mind a little more personal,
Yeah.
you have a spouse,
Mm-hmm.
2 kids.
Yeah.
How do you balance family life with startup life?
I know. I was going to get this question. So when you look out, you have all these like, successful CEOs saying, oh, startups, there is no work-life balance. There is nothing about balance at all. So one thing, shouts out to my beautiful wife. Because when I took this leap, especially when you have a spouse, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
And so making sure you guys are on the same page is essential. And my wife is the biggest risk taker ever. And so definitely, building consensus on that. But making sure that, hey, if I'm going to do this, it's all in and I'm not going to waste my time on getting second place. And so it's the mentality, and we both share that mentality, which allow things to like move smoothly along. When you enter kids, it gets interesting. What's funny, I actually had my kids on investor calls, and it's almost like my way of filtering out like which investor is going to be like weirded out and which investors are going to be like, oh, let me bring my kids. Hey guys, come on in. And so that actually is like a good pro to it. But balancing that is a never ending battle. Like, after this podcast, I'm going to take my daughter out for a nice walk with my dog, and then catch up with Marcelo and then, get to some customers. And so
Who's Marcelo?
My co-founder. And so that's kind of like, it's just a never ending battle of finding that routine. But like, of course, having an amazing wife to kind of support you along that is definitely bonus. But it's just something in me that comes to being a father, a husband, and making sure like, hey, startups are great, but it's not the end all be all. I have beautiful kids start growing up every day, yanking on my shoulder to say, let's go outside. I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it. And so when I always try to balance it in a way of finding different pockets of time, making sure like, hey, this is like the time to hang out with family, kids, but like also having that little asterisk on that of like, hey, if I have a customer that's like a guaranteed close, babe, let me go close them real quick. Like, I'm going to do it. Make sure, it's funny. I make sure I'm not wasting my time. And I was like, here you go. Boom, invoice, done. But it's just like, it's a constant seesaw, if the best way I could put it. It's just like there's good days, bad days, just like in life in general, but like just being cognizant in supporting your spouse, your wife, your husband, etc., whoever's listening, is, making sure the other person's glass is full as well. That's one thing that, is always essential, because, it takes two to tango, and you don't want to like burn people out as well in the process too. So you want to make sure you know, you stay along the journey of path and supporting each other.
What do you think that you would say back to your self back at San Jose State, who was starting the rideshare business?
Mm-hmm.
Was, I imagine, maybe not single at the time,
Mm-hmm.
definitely did not have children or a dog.
Yeah.
Like, I guess two questions. One is, do you feel like that, do you feel like being in the situation you're in right now in your personal life and the
Mm-hmm.
experiences you've had have set you up in a way that's really more of a positive than what you were back then?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, like, what would you take back to that person at that point as
Mm-hmm.
well? Two very different
Yeah.
questions. Sorry.
Yeah. 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 What's funny is, like, when I was making that ride sharing business, my girlfriend, now wife,
Okay.
was been around that journey with me from the very beginning.
Wow.
So she knew how crazy I am. What's funny though, Jason, is like, my wife, since it was a college carpooling app, she went to Berkeley. She would actually take the flyers I made and plaster the women's bathroom.
Wow.
And she, like I said, she is one of the biggest risk takers. And so she will follow me to conventions at UC Davis, to Berkeley, San Jose State. She was even in the promo video for the goddamn college carpooling app. So, like, I think as I look back, you know what? I did pretty well. The
Yeah.
only thing I would have taken back to Masoud that's starting that business is make money early. So the problem was that, like, we were so hyper focused on customers and like just getting people on, like, hey, post a drive, post a ride, connect with people. We forgot to make money faster, which is and ended up becoming our doing. And so yeah, if I were to go back and see myself as like, hey man, do in-app payments, please. Everything else you did fantastic. You have a beautiful wife, beautiful kids, you're doing well. Maybe invest in a few companies that are coming up, but like, make money, man. Like, and that's one thing that I, especially when you're like building out some sort of service, um, the biggest indicator that you got something if people are willing to pay for it. And so that's something I
Sure.
would definitely lean on. If I were to tell myself, if I were to be somehow telling myself, when starting that.
And then what about, how do you think the experiences that you've had in your design career have
Yep.
shaped how you think about your own business today?
Yeah, I think the obsession with user experience tends to shift to customer experience, because
Mm-hmm.
as a designer, we focus on, the user, the UI. Like, oftentimes when you're in those team settings, you don't want to also bump to other people's shoulders and take a lot of their work. You usually tend to stay in your lane and do what you can to support and help. But then you're shifting from designer to founder, you go from user experience to customer experience. You become obsessive on that, from revenue to experience to almost every possible entry point to your product. Like, you own the customer experience, the customer journey, versus some subset within a bigger org. So that transition is where, not sure, but maybe some designers might see as daunting. I was like, oh wow, I need to own everything now. This is going to be kind of tough. But that's the best part, though, is that you get to
Mm-hmm.
design that customer experience, which is the user experience, etc. So that's kind of like how I would kind of paint that transition from designer to founder, if that makes sense.
What would be your advice to any designer listening to this who's interested in founding their own company, or even has an idea that they would consider founding at some
Yeah.
point or turning it into a real business?
I'd say get it out as fast as possible. I think there's the tools are out today that allows you to build something very quickly.
Mm,
Um, all of a sudden, these new AI code reviews becoming your new prototype playground. You now can get something on staging in maybe a couple days and writing natural language. So you don't have much excuse to not get something to your customer to see if it's any validation. So if you're a designer that wants to start something, you needed to start it yesterday and get it out as fast as you can. But another interesting thing that I encourage people is to have conviction in what they're building. A big part of a founder is hiring. If you don't believe in what you're building, what makes you think investors, customers even believe you? If you get pushed
mm,
ball off of one piece of feedback, unsolicited feedback, or any type of feedback in general, and you're like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, then you shouldn't be doing it at all.
mm.
You need to have conviction. Do you know how many times people told me that no one's going to be applying to these jobs because of the audio? Dude, we transcribed over 35,000 minutes of audio and stories. Like, be gone. Because that's what it takes. Because again, this new muscle needs to come in, and that's conviction. You need to, because you're going to be told no. You're going to need to be convincing your team, your engineer that you know at Netflix to leave their $500,000 total comp salary to come on board and get paid 60. You have to convince them why. And so being able to center yourself into your storytelling self to tell that journey of what it could be like in the future, you're going to be flexing all these different muscles. So, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Um, I guess something else that you were just bringing up is AI tools. I'm curious, are you yourself using these tools in your own startup?
You know, not as much as the world may think that people are using. You know, AI is finding its footing. I'm not using some sort of like magical AI design tool. I feel like where it could play a big role is solving that blank canvas problem that we've been seeing with even within Figma, for example, to kind of jumpstart the inspiration and things like that. But we're not using anything crazy. Of course, we're using OpenAI, GPT-4, DeepGram for transcripts and summaries, agents, and stuff like that. But in terms of building, like me designing personally, not really using much in general. So I haven't found anything that caught my eye, but Marcelo, my co-founder, every time I mention any type of coding tool, he always says, dude, garbage in, garbage out. So most senior engineers,
Interesting.
so most senior engineers typically be like, bro, I already know how to start a fire. Why? And it works and it's clear and it's clean. There's this weird gray area with AI tools of how often are you confirming what the AI spat out in terms of coding? Like, how often are you going back and checking the code and making sure it didn't mess up? Because if you're constantly
Mm,
checking, you're kind of like, well, how come you just don't do yourself if you're constantly spending more time checking, right? So it's just like, is it actually playing in your favor or not? Because all these, if you go into Chat GPT and say, write me an email, how many times are you constantly asking it to revise, revise, revise? I guarantee you, most people would say, oh yeah, always take it off of first shot, 100%. I highly doubt that. So for
yeah.
me, not really using much because I haven't seen something that has really caught my eye on my process. But of course, we use tools like, for summaries and transcripts and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm excited though. Like there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. So really interested in seeing what happens in the design space. So be more than happy to take anything on that saves time.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think I see that myself. I don't know that, when you're actually building something that Well, let me back up. I think with this interesting intersection where it's very easy to replicate what exists,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is that if you're going to create your own brand,
Mm-hmm.
your own patterns, your own components,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that really exists right now
Yeah.
to do that. And,
And
if you want to create another XYZ company that looks like, let's say Airbnb, if I want to make something look like Airbnb, great, I can do that. But that's not
yeah,
going
it
to be
goes.
successful.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
like Rafa, for example, has a very unique look and feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can't just put into an AI tool, like make that.
Yeah, yeah, because the issue that maybe the next generation of builders and current that rely on these AI is the creativity part is probably going to be the most important part of a product, a brand's voice, what it stands.
Mm.
If 10 years ago when you answer the question, walk me through a project you're most proud of versus maybe the future, it goes from storytelling versus prompts, right? If everyone can code and if everyone can maybe spit out some coding language, some repository and spin up like a web app, well, what else can you do? You know, like, how do you think through edge cases? How do you deal
Yeah.
with, how do you deal with the point where you have an enterprise customer that will love to pay you millions of dollars, but will derail you from the 99%? What would you do? You know, these are the types of questions that are going to matter when it comes to hiring, especially in this AI world, because if everyone can code, what else are able to bring to the table, right?
It kind of reminds me of what you were talking about with Meta, which is you've got so much,
Yeah, exactly.
but you've got to be able to, like you said, hyper focus
Yeah,
and cut through all the clutter.
yeah.
And
Exactly.
so that doesn't change. That actually becomes more important.
It becomes more important because then you need to stand on your own 2 feet and defend your design decisions. How
Mm.
did you get there? Why did you get
You can't
there?
say, well, Chat GPT
Yeah,
told me
yeah,
to do
yeah.
it.
You can't do that. And I have a feeling that, most hiring decisions won't go so well if that's the answer that you give. There
Right.
has to be some substance because at the end of the day, humans hire humans. AI is simply a tool, not an end all be all. And what's funny enough, we're really, well, like coming back to Rafa, like we're defending the human element by using
Yeah.
AI, ironically. And so,
Mm.
and that's what's cool about it is like, hey, everyone's going to be very smart in the future. And everyone's, going to be looking fantastic on paper. But I guarantee you're going to get different answers when you provide this question.
Yes, it really, you know, to maybe bring this all back together, it really reminds me of how you talked about Rafa, which is you're cutting through that in a world where everyone can write an email that looks professional.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone can have an LLM tell them how to write their LinkedIn or their resume well.
Mm-hmm.
And they can also prep and read a script
Mm-hmm.
that has been given to them based on industry information or whatever it may be. It really does come down to those details of
Yeah.
like, how is someone answering it
Yeah.
off the cuff? If I ask them a question, how are they answering that question? It's
Exactly.
actually like more important to cut through that layer and get like a level deeper into who someone is.
That this brings up an interesting point. We had a customer actually, I was onboarding them. There's a Duke dropout. They just graduated YC, very, very smart people. And I was getting them set up. We were getting into that section, adding their audio questions. And I was thinking to myself, man, they're about to ask something crazy technical. Oh my goodness, I cannot wait. But he put one interesting question, and it was, if the servers go down Sunday night, what do you do? And I was like, for a senior staff engineering role, okay. Why, why would you do that? And then he turned to me. He's like, dude, anyone can code, but can I trust you?
Oh, I love that.
And I was like, interesting.
I mean, in a lot of ways, that's what you guys are creating. Try to,
Exactly. Because coding is coding. But when your back's against the wall, when shit hits the fan at bigger companies, small mom and pop shops, startups, when shit hits the fan, that's when the true people come out. So
mm,
hiring managers, hiring teams, recruiters know what they're listening for. But unfortunately, time has taken them away from that because of all the AI slop that you see and all these crazy resumes that they don't have the time of day to take a listen.
mm.
But now they do because we kind of streamline all that for them. So I thought that was a really interesting thing, especially in this AI world where authenticity is being blurred. Storytelling, creativity, empathy,
Yeah.
thoughtfulness, being conscious and having good, clear execution, because everyone assumes you can design good. Everyone assumes that you can do this. But what's the hardest thing you ever done? Right. So like there's a lot of unlock that comes in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Masoud. Really appreciate your time.
Dude, thank you, man. It
Such a
was,
pleasure.
yeah,
And I'm
man.
glad you were the first person to
Hell yeah.
to do this with me.
Number one, man, let's make it happen. But I'm excited to see all the other guests that come in. This is one of many, man. So I'm super excited to see where this goes and like happy to support you along the way, man.
I appreciate that. You as well. Have a wonderful day.
You too, man.
Bye
Peace.
bye.
Bye. I think this is where you actually end.